The night was quiet in the sleepy town of Cedar Ridge, with only the sound of crickets breaking the silence. Dr. Eliza Kepler sat on her porch, gazing at the stars through her telescope. The renowned astronomer had spent countless nights mapping the heavens, but tonight something caught her eye. A streak of light tearing through the sky. It wasn't a shooting star. It moved erratically, growing brighter as it descended. Eliza's heart raced. A meteor. She whispered to herself, her scientific curiosity overriding any sense of caution. But as the light grew closer, she realized it was something far stranger. A thunderous crash echoed through the nearby forest, shaking the ground beneath her feet. The lights in her house flickered. Grabbing her flashlight and a heavy jacket, Eliza set off toward the source, her mind buzzing with questions. She followed the trail of broken branches and scorched earth until she reached a clearing. There, nestled amidst the trees, was a ship, sleek, metallic, and unlike anything she had ever seen. The craft shimmered under the moonlight, faint blue lights pulsing along its surface as if it were alive. Steam hissed from its fractured hull, and the air smelled of burnt metal. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't alone. Near the wreckage lay a figure, humanoid but distinctly alien. Its skin shimmered like silver, with faint traces of scales. Its eyes, large and almond-shaped, glowed faintly blue. The creature was injured, clutching its side where a dark, viscous liquid seeped out. "Help! Me!" it rasped, its voice echoing strangely, as if layered with harmonics. Eliza froze, torn between fear and compassion. But as the creature's glowing eyes locked onto hers, she saw something she hadn't expected. Fear. This being, whatever it was, wasn't a threat. It was terrified. Eliza dropped to her knees beside the alien. "I'll help you," she said softly, unsure if it understood her. She carefully inspected its wound, her hands trembling. "You need medical attention." The alien flinched but didn't resist as she wrapped a makeshift bandage around its side. Its breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of its chest accompanied by a faint hum. Suddenly, a distant hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. Eliza looked up, her stomach sinking. A pair of drones zipped through the sky, their red searchlights slicing through the darkness. They were sleek and menacing, clearly not human-made. The alien grabbed her wrist, its grip surprisingly strong. "Hide. Me," it pleaded, its voice weak but urgent. Eliza didn't hesitate. She helped the alien to its feet, or what passed for feet, and guided it toward the shadows of the trees. The drones passed overhead, their lights scanning the crash site. Eliza's heart pounded as she crouched beside the alien, praying they wouldn't be discovered. As the drones moved on, Eliza looked at the alien. "You've got a lot of explaining to do," she whispered. The alien met her gaze, its eyes filled with both gratitude and fear. The chase had just begun. The small cabin in the woods was dimly lit, the only light coming from a single lamp on the kitchen table. Eliza had brought the alien, who called itself Carethel, to her late father's hunting cabin, a place no one ever visited. Carethel sat awkwardly in a chair, its glowing blue eyes scanning the room as though expecting danger at any moment. Eliza paced nervously, her mind racing with questions. "Who are you? What do you want? And why did those drones seem ready to kill you?" Her voice was a mix of curiosity and frustration. Carethel looked at her, its expression difficult to read. Its voice came out in soft, melodic tones, as if two voices spoke at once. "I am an outcast. My kind, the Zypherans, do not tolerate failure or weakness. I was different." "Different how?" Eliza pressed, trying to make sense of this strange being. "In my world, logic is everything," Carethel explained, its hands clasped tightly together. "Feelings, emotions, they are considered distractions, flaws that must be eliminated. But I could not stop feeling. I cared too much for the lives of others, even for species my kind deem inferior." Eliza's brow furrowed. "Inferior? You're saying your people look down on us? Carethel hesitated, then nodded. Humans are unpredictable, emotional, chaotic. My people fear that chaos, yet also despise it. They consider your kind a threat, even though you are far behind us technologically. Eliza let out a bitter laugh. Well, that's comforting. Carethel continued, its tone heavier now. I was a diplomat, tasked with studying other species, but when I refused an order to destroy a colony of innocents during a territorial dispute, I was branded a traitor. They stripped me of my rank, exiled me, and sent enforcers to hunt me down. Eliza's pacing slowed as she processed the alien's words. You mean those drones? They're after you because you disobeyed an order. Carethel nodded again. The drones are only the beginning. The enforcers will come next. They are relentless, and they will not stop until I am eliminated. A chill ran down Eliza's spine. She sat down across from Carethel, her voice softening. Why come to Earth? You had to know it wouldn't be safe here. Carethel's glowing eyes dimmed slightly, as though expressing sorrow. Your planet was not my destination. My ship was damaged, and I lost control. I did not mean to involve you in this. Eliza crossed her arms, her scientific curiosity outweighing her fear. Well, you're here now, and it looks like we're stuck together. But if what you're saying is true, those enforcers won't just stop at you. They'll come for anyone who helps you. Carethel lowered its gaze. I did not wish for this. Neither did I, Eliza said, standing up. But if we're going to survive, we need a plan. Carethel looked up, hope flickering in its alien eyes. You would help me. Eliza nodded. Help me understand, and maybe I can help you. The alien's faint smile was the closest it had come to showing emotion. For the first time, it felt a glimmer of something unfamiliar. Trust. The forest around the cabin was eerily quiet as dawn began to creep over the horizon. Eliza sat by the window, her eyes scanning the tree line for any signs of movement. Carethel sat on the floor nearby, its slender frame hunched as it tinkered with a small device salvaged from its ship. Is that some kind of weapon? Eliza asked, her voice low. Carethel shook its head, its silver skin shimmering faintly in the dim light. No, a jammer. If it works, it will block the enforcer's tracking signals for a short time. But it is fragile and unreliable. Great, Eliza muttered, gripping her mug of cold coffee. Fragile and unreliable sounds exactly like what we need right now. Suddenly, a distant hum broke the silence. It was faint but growing louder by the second. Eliza froze, her heart pounding. Drones, she whispered. Carethel stood quickly, its glowing eyes narrowing. They found us. Eliza grabbed her coat and a backpack she had hastily filled with supplies the night before. We need to move. Now. The two slipped out of the cabin, sticking to the shadows as they made their way deeper into the forest. The hum of the drones grew louder, accompanied by the sharp buzz of searchlights slicing through the trees. Carethel glanced upward, its expression tense. They will scan for heat signatures, it warned. We must stay ahead of them. Eliza nodded, her breath coming in short bursts as they weaved through the underbrush. Her boots crunched on the frozen ground, and every sound seemed deafening in the stillness. How long before the enforcers arrive? Carethel hesitated. Hours, maybe less. Their ships are far faster than yours. Fantastic, Eliza muttered. So, we're on borrowed time. As they pushed further into the forest, the terrain grew steeper and more treacherous. Eliza slipped on a patch of wet leaves, barely catching herself on a tree trunk. You sure you didn't crash in a flatter part of the planet? Carethel didn't answer, its focus entirely on the drones above. The jammer in its hands flickered with blue light as it adjusted the settings. If I can activate this at the right frequency, it should disrupt their sensors, but it will not last long. The buzzing of the drones was now directly overhead. Eliza glanced up, her stomach sinking as she spotted the sleek black machines, their red lights scanning the ground like predators hunting prey. "Do it now," she hissed. Carethel pressed a button on the device, and a low-pitched hum filled the air. The red lights of the drones flickered, then went dark. The machines wobbled in midair before retreating, their engines sputtering as they vanished into the distance. Eliza let out a shaky breath. It worked. "For now," Carethel said, its voice grim. "But they will adapt. They always do." Eliza looked at the alien, her determination hardening. "Then we'll have to stay ahead of them. Let's keep moving." As the two disappeared into the forest, neither noticed the faint glow of a ship descending in the distance. The enforcers had arrived. Eliza and Carethel emerged from the dense forest just as the first light of dawn bathed the landscape in a golden glow. Ahead of them was a small, isolated cabin that sat on the edge of an abandoned quarry. Eliza knew this place well. It belonged to her old friend and former colleague, Dr. Marcus Tyne, a reclusive genius who had cut ties with the outside world years ago. "This is the only place I know where we might have a chance," Eliza said, panting as she leaned against a tree. Carethel tilted its head, its glowing eyes scanning the area. "Who is this?" "Marcus." Eliza wiped sweat from her brow. "A brilliant engineer. If anyone can help us stay one step ahead of your enforcers, it's him." They approached the cabin cautiously, Eliza raising her hand to knock on the reinforced steel door. Before her fist made contact, a voice crackled through an intercom. "Eliza Kepler, what in the world are you doing here? And who, or what, is that with you?" Marcus's voice was sharp, tinged with suspicion. "It's a long story, Marcus," Eliza said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "But we don't have time. We're being hunted, and we need your help." There was a long pause before the door creaked open. Marcus stood in the doorway, his unkempt hair and grease-stained clothes a testament to his hermit-like lifestyle. His sharp blue eyes immediately locked onto Carethel, narrowing with distrust. "What have you dragged into my home?" he muttered, stepping aside to let them in. Inside, the cabin was a chaotic mess of tools, gadgets, and half-finished inventions. Screens lined the walls, displaying streams of data, satellite images, and encrypted communications. Carethel's gaze lingered on the technology, a hint of curiosity in its usually stoic expression. Eliza quickly explained the situation, sparing no detail. Marcus listened in silence, his arms crossed. When she finished, he let out a low whistle. "So let me get this straight. You've got an alien fugitive in tow, advanced drones, and enforcers chasing you. And you thought bringing that mess here was a good idea." "I didn't have a choice," Eliza snapped. "You're the only person I know who can help." Marcus's gaze flicked back to Carethel. "And why should I trust this thing? For all we know, it's leading them straight to us." Carethel straightened, its voice calm but firm. "If I wanted to endanger you, I would not have jammed their signals. I understand your fear, human, but my only wish is to survive." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his suspicion giving way to reluctant curiosity. "Fine, but if this goes sideways, don't say I didn't warn you." He turned to one of the screens, typing furiously on a keyboard. "Let's see what we're dealing with. If those enforcers are as advanced as you say, we're going to need more than just a jammer. We'll need decoys, traps, and maybe a little misdirection." Carethel stepped closer, its eyes fixed on the screen. "I can provide knowledge of their tactics, but we must act quickly. They will adapt." As the two began to collaborate, Eliza leaned against the wall, her mind racing. They had gained an ally, but tensions ran high. Survival depended on whether this uneasy alliance could hold. The hum of Marcus's computers filled the cabin as the trio worked tirelessly through the night. Maps, blueprints, and tactical layouts cluttered the table. Marcus had unearthed old surveillance tech and modified it, while Carethel provided insights into the Xipheran enforcers' methods. Despite their shared goal, tension simmered beneath the surface. "These enforcers," Marcus said, his eyes glued to a glowing schematic of a Xipheran drone. "They're efficient, logical, and ruthless. What's stopping them from just leveling this place from orbit? They calculate efficiency, Carathel replied, standing by the window as it watched the horizon. Orbital strikes are costly. They prefer precision, minimal collateral damage. Marcus scoffed, glancing at Eliza. Minimal collateral damage. How comforting. Eliza, tired but determined, ignored his sarcasm. What about their weakness? There has to be something we can use. Carathel turned to face her. Humans themselves are their weakness. Eliza frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Your kind is unpredictable, Carathel explained. You do not follow patterns or logic. To my people, this is dangerous. It is why they fear you, why they want to eliminate the possibility of humans ever becoming a threat. Marcus let out a low whistle. So, we're the wild card. That's actually kind of flattering. Eliza leaned forward, her mind racing. If they can't predict us, then we need to use that to our advantage. We create chaos. Make them second-guess themselves. Chaos can work, Carathel agreed, its voice steady. But it must be deliberate. If we are too scattered, they will adapt. Marcus grinned, a mischievous gleam in his eyes. Oh, I'm all for controlled chaos. Let's give them something they've never seen before. By morning, their plan was in motion. Marcus had rigged a series of decoy emitters throughout the quarry, each one mimicking the energy signature of Carathel's ship. He had also planted traps, improvised explosives and electromagnetic pulses designed to disrupt the drones. Eliza worked tirelessly alongside Marcus, her hands covered in grease, as they fine-tuned the equipment. Carathel, though unfamiliar with human tools, assisted where it could, its sharp mind quickly grasping the basics. As the sun began to rise, the hum of approaching drones broke the silence. Marcus's voice crackled over the makeshift comms system. Showtime, folks. Everyone in position. Eliza crouched behind a rock, her heart pounding as she watched the first drone enter the quarry. Its red lights scanned the area, locking onto one of the decoys. Moments later, an explosion rocked the ground, sending the drone spiraling into the dirt. They're adapting, Carathel warned, its voice calm despite the chaos. The next wave will be harder. The remaining drones hovered in formation, their movements precise. But as they moved to investigate another decoy, Marcus activated an electromagnetic pulse, sending half of them crashing to the ground. For a moment, it seemed like they might have the upper hand. But then, a deafening roar filled the air. A Sci-Fi dropship descended, its sleek black hull gleaming in the sunlight. Eliza's blood ran cold. They're here. Carathel stepped forward, its posture tense but resolute. This is only the beginning. Stay unpredictable. The fight for survival had truly begun. The sharp sound of rushing wind filled the air as the Sci-Fi dropship descended, its dark silhouette blocking out the sun. Eliza's heart raced as she crouched behind a boulder, watching the ship land with terrifying precision. The ground trembled under its weight, and the whirring of its engines died down as the craft settled. Here they come, Marcus muttered, his voice tense. He was crouched next to Eliza, his fingers poised over the controls of the comms system. His eyes flicked to Carathel, who was standing a few feet away. Its glowing blue eyes locked onto the ship. The alien's stance was calm, but Eliza could sense the underlying tension. The enforcers were close, and they would not make the same mistake twice. Carathel's voice cut through the air. We need to stall them. Delay their approach long enough for us to make a move. Marcus adjusted the settings on his makeshift radio jammer. I've got an idea, but it's going to get risky. We don't have time, Eliza replied, peering around the boulder. The dropship's hatch opened, and a group of heavily armored Sci-Fi soldiers stepped out, their movements sharp and efficient. They were scanning the area, their eyes glowing faintly as they searched for any sign of their target. Carathel turned to face Eliza and Marcus, its expression unreadable. I will distract them. Give me cover. Marcus's hand shot out, grabbing Carithal's arm. "No, you can't go out there alone. They'll kill you the second you show yourself." "I am their target," Carithal said, its voice calm but firm. "They will focus on me. You can act while their attention is elsewhere." Eliza looked at Marcus, then back at Carithal. They had no other choice. The alien was right. They had to act now, or they'd be trapped. "I'll provide the diversion," Marcus said after a beat. "You two head for the ridge. I'll draw their attention with some of my toys." "Be careful," Eliza said, her voice tight with concern. Marcus gave a half-smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry. I got this." He quickly moved to a higher vantage point, positioning himself behind a stack of old crates. Eliza and Carithal moved toward the ridge, keeping low and silent. The Xiphoran soldiers were still scanning the area, oblivious to their movements. Marcus activated his first trap. A sudden burst of sound and flashing lights blared from a nearby cluster of rocks. The soldiers immediately turned their attention toward it, weapons raised. A few of them started to move in the direction of the noise, their steps swift and confident. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. It worked. Carithal's eyes narrowed. "Not for long. We have minutes." Eliza nodded. "Let's go." They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows. The terrain was difficult, the ground uneven and rocky, but they pressed on. Eliza could hear the faint sound of Marcus's voice over the comms, directing the traps and confusing the soldiers. The battle of wits had begun in earnest, and Marcus was using every trick in his arsenal to keep the enforcers off balance. Carithal glanced at Eliza. "This, human ingenuity. It is remarkable." Eliza grinned despite the danger. "You haven't seen anything yet." But even as they moved closer to the ridge, the sound of heavy boots stomping toward them grew louder. The enforcers were regrouping. The window of escape was closing. The rocks beneath Eliza's boots crunched as she crouched behind a jagged outcrop, her eyes scanning the horizon. The enforcers were closing in, their movements swift and calculated. The battle was no longer just about survival. It was about outsmarting an enemy that seemed to anticipate every move. Carithal stood a few steps ahead, its glowing eyes locked onto the advancing soldiers. The alien's posture was tense, but there was a glimmer of something new in its gaze. Determination. Eliza had seen that look before, in herself during moments of crisis. It was the face of someone who refused to give up. "Do you have a plan?" Eliza whispered, her voice low. Carithal's eyes flicked toward her. "You humans are unpredictable. That is your strength, but we must use that strength wisely." Eliza's pulse quickened as she watched the enforcers move closer. The traps Marcus had set had slowed them down, but it wouldn't be long before they adapted. The soldiers were too methodical, too precise. They would soon find their way around the distractions. "We need to make them think we're somewhere else," Eliza said, the idea forming in her mind. "We have to lead them into a false position." Carithal nodded. "Yes, but they will not fall for a simple decoy." "Then we make it chaotic," Eliza said, a spark of hope lighting her eyes. "We give them too many possibilities. We confuse them." Carithal looked at her, a strange sense of respect flashing in its gaze. "Lead the way, human." Eliza took a deep breath. She had no time to waste. She pulled out a small device from her bag, one of the modified gadgets Marcus had put together earlier. It was a simple holographic emitter, designed to create illusions. She pressed a button, and a faint blue light flickered to life. Within seconds, a full-scale illusion of Carithal appeared, standing on a ridge opposite their current position. The hologram waved its arms, attracting the attention of the nearest group of enforcers. "They'll think it's real," Eliza murmured. "We use the confusion to slip away." Carithal's expression softened for a moment. "You are clever." Before Eliza could reply, Marcus's voice crackled through the comms. "I've got more traps ready. You two better move fast. I've got their attention, but it won't last." The ground shook as the dropship's engines roared to life, signaling that the enforcers were preparing for a full assault. Eliza's heart pounded as she motioned for Carithel to follow her. They dashed toward the forest, weaving through the trees and taking cover whenever the illusion flickered out of sight. The enforcers took the bait, their attention split between the decoy and the real world. Their movements became less coordinated, more hesitant. Each step they took seemed to be guided by uncertainty, as if they were trying to solve a puzzle with too many pieces. Eliza and Carithel ran as fast as they could, the distance between them and the enforcers widening with each step. Behind them, Marcus's traps continued to disrupt the enemy, throwing the Zypherans into further confusion. As they reached a narrow ravine, Eliza slowed, catching her breath. She looked at Carithel, who was still running alongside her. The alien seemed different now, less like a threat and more like an ally, a partner in this desperate fight for survival. "They're not used to this," Eliza said, her voice filled with a sense of triumph. "They're not used to thinking like us." Carithel nodded. "And that is why you will win." For the first time, Eliza believed it. They had the upper hand, but even as they hid in the ravine, she knew it wasn't over. The enforcers would regroup, they would adapt. But for now, they had turned the tide. The ravine was quiet for a moment, but Eliza could hear the distant hum of engines as the Zypheran enforcers began to regroup. The chaos they had created was only temporary. The enemy would adapt, and soon they would be back on their trail. Carithel crouched next to Eliza, its glowing eyes scanning the horizon. "They will not stop," it said softly. "They are relentless." Eliza wiped the sweat from her forehead, her mind racing. "We need to make our last stand count. We can't keep running forever." Carithel nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I have an idea. We can use the terrain to our advantage." Eliza looked up at the steep cliffs surrounding them. "The cliffs. Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" "Yes," Carithel said, standing up. "We will force them into the narrow pass ahead. Once they are trapped, we can use the rocks and trees to isolate them." Eliza took a deep breath. It was a risky plan, but it was their best chance. She glanced at the comm system, where Marcus's voice crackled through. "What's the plan?" "We're going to lead them into the pass ahead," Eliza said, her voice steady. "Once they're in, we use the terrain to trap them. You'll need to set up explosives at key points." Marcus's voice sounded sharp. "Got it. Just don't get yourselves killed out there." Carithel moved quickly, signaling for Eliza to follow. They started moving toward the narrow pass, staying hidden behind boulders and trees as the sound of the enforcers' footsteps grew louder. Every few moments, they would stop to listen, ensuring the enemy was still on their tail. The enforcers were close now, and Eliza could feel the tension in the air. Carithel seemed calm, its every movement precise. But Eliza's heart raced. She had no idea if their plan would work, but it was their only shot. As they neared the entrance to the pass, Eliza glanced over her shoulder and saw the first wave of enforcers rounding the corner. There was no turning back now. "Now," Carithel whispered. The two of them sprinted into the narrow pass, forcing the enforcers to follow. The rocks on either side of them loomed high, offering little escape. Eliza could hear the enforcers shouting orders to one another, their voices cold and efficient. They were closing in fast. "Marcus now," Eliza yelled into the comms. There was a brief pause, then the ground shook as explosions erupted along the cliffs. Rocks tumbled down, blocking off the enforcers' escape routes. The narrow pass became even tighter, and Eliza could hear the confusion in the enforcers' voices as they realized they had been trapped. "They're trapped," Carithel said, a small flicker of satisfaction in its voice. "Now we finish this." But just as Eliza thought they might have won, a new sound echoed through the pass, something much louder. The ground trembled again, this time not from explosions, but from the engines of a massive ship descending from above. The Zypheran mothership had arrived. Eliza's stomach dropped. They hadn't won yet, The battle was far from over. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the Xipharan mothership slowly descended from the sky. Its dark, imposing shape blocked out the sun, casting a shadow over the ravine. The hum of its engines was deafening, and Eliza's heart sank as she realized how much worse their situation had become. "We're not going to get out of this one, are we?" Eliza whispered, her voice trained with disbelief. Carethel stood beside her, its glowing eyes fixed on the mothership as it landed with a heavy thud. "No," it said, its voice calm but heavy with regret. "They will not let us go." The mothership's hatch slowly opened, and a group of Xipharan enforcers disembarked, their tall, armored forms imposing as they scanned the ravine. They had been outsmarted, tricked by their own logic and the chaos Eliza and Carethel had created, but now there was no escape. Eliza looked at Carethel, her thoughts racing. "We can't fight them all. We don't have enough time to get away. They'll wipe us out before we even have a chance." Carethel turned to her, its expression more human than before, the weight of its past and future pressing on its shoulders. "There is only one way to end this." "What are you talking about?" Eliza asked, her voice tightening with fear. "You can't." "I must sacrifice myself," Carethel interrupted softly. "I know their systems. I know how to disable their ship, but it will require my presence in the ship's control room." Eliza's stomach twisted. "No, you can't. We can find another way." Carethel shook its head. "You do not understand. If I do nothing, they will destroy Earth. This is the only chance you have to survive." Eliza grabbed its arm, her eyes wide. "You can't be serious. I won't let you do it." Carethel's voice softened. "You have proven that humans can fight against overwhelming odds. Your kind will survive. But I am already lost." Eliza's throat tightened. She couldn't let Carethel make such a sacrifice, but deep down, she knew it was the only choice. "Carethel, please," she pleaded, fighting back tears. "I've learned so much from you. You're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry this burden alone." The alien's gaze softened as it looked down at her. "You are right, Eliza, but this is my burden to bear." A roar from the mothership interrupted their moment. The enforcers had spotted them, and they were closing in. Eliza's heart pounded. She had only a few seconds to act. "Listen to me," Eliza said urgently, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "If you do this, I will make sure your sacrifice wasn't in vain. We'll stop them. We'll make sure your people see that you were right." Carethel took a step back, its eyes meeting hers one last time. "I hope you do." With that, it turned and began walking toward the mothership, its movements calm but determined. Eliza watched helplessly as Carethel approached the ship, knowing there was no turning back now. The enforcers were closing in on her, but she couldn't move. Every part of her wanted to run to Carethel, to stop it from going, but deep down, she knew this was the only way to save them all. Carethel reached the ship's entrance, its figure now silhouetted against the dark metal of the vessel. As it disappeared inside, Eliza held her breath, praying that this sacrifice would bring an end to the nightmare they had been living. The countdown had begun. Eliza stood in the shadow of the mothership, her eyes fixed on the spot where Carethel had disappeared moments before. The enforcers were closing in, but her mind was elsewhere. She could feel the weight of the sacrifice Carethel had just made. The alien had walked into the mothership knowing it might never come back. But even as panic threatened to rise in her chest, a new sense of hope flickered inside her. Carethel had given everything to save Earth. Now it was up to her, and the rest of humanity, to finish what had been started. The air crackled with tension as the Xipharan enforcers neared, their footsteps echoing across the ravine. But Eliza wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She wasn't alone. She had a world of possibilities ahead, and she would not let it be destroyed without a fight. She took a deep breath and activated her comm device. "Marcus, you copy?" The crackling sound of static filled her ear before Marcus's voice came through, slightly garbled. "Eliza, you okay? What's happening?" "I don't know yet," she replied, her voice steady. "But Carathel, it did something. It's on the ship now. I need you to get ready." Marcus's voice shifted, suddenly urgent. "Ready for what?" Eliza looked up at the mothership, a strange sense of determination filling her. "We have one chance to stop them. And I'm not going to let this end with Carathel's sacrifice being for nothing." She could hear Marcus's hesitation, but then his voice became firm. "I'll be ready." The next few moments felt like an eternity. The enforcers were nearly upon her, their weapons raised, eyes cold with certainty. Eliza had no illusions about the odds. She wasn't going to win this fight with brute force, but she wasn't going to give up either. She grabbed the last of the modified devices Marcus had prepared, a small, simple remote detonator. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. She pressed it into the ground, setting it up so that when the time came, it would trigger the electromagnetic pulses that Marcus had hidden throughout the area. It was their last line of defense. Just as the enforcers reached the edge of the ravine, the ground rumbled beneath Eliza's feet. The mothership's engines roared to life, and a blinding light erupted from within the ship, sending a shockwave through the air. The enforcers froze, their eyes widening in confusion. It worked. Carathel had activated the ship's systems, overriding the control systems with its knowledge. The ship had now been disabled, its powerful engines flickering and stalling. The enforcers were paralyzed by the unexpected turn of events. Eliza didn't wait for them to regroup. She pressed the detonator, and the electromagnetic pulses rippled out, disabling the enforcers' technology in an instant. Their weapons went silent, and their communications failed. They were stranded. But the fight wasn't over. As the enforcers scrambled to regain control, Eliza called Marcus. "Now." With a loud crash, Marcus's homemade devices activated, blocking the enforcers' retreat and further trapping them in the ravine. The remaining enforcers were confused, struggling to adapt, but it was too late. Eliza watched as the last of the enforcers dropped their weapons, their once unshakable confidence shattered. They had been outwitted by the humans, something they could never have predicted. In the distance, the mothership's lights flickered one last time before it shut down completely. Carathel had succeeded. Eliza turned away from the wreckage and looked toward the horizon. The battle was over, and Earth was safe. But she knew that the true victory was not just in surviving. It was in the partnership that had been forged between humanity and the alien outcast who had risked everything for a world that wasn't its own. Carathel had given humanity something more than survival. It had given them hope. And for the first time in a long while, Eliza believed that hope could change the future.